St. Vincent is a small island in the Caribbean. These 3 sailing boats, frail and primitive, are a symbol of one of the greatest onslaughts that man has ever launched against nature. Not that these men have contributed greatly to it, but they epitomize the approach. They are hunting for what they believe to be a black fish. In fact, it's not a fish, but a small whale. What is a whale? A creature of mystery, surrounded by myth, portrayed alternately as a terrible sea monster and a great philosopher of the deep. The trouble is that man seldom sees a whole whale, except when it's dead. Then he marvels at the sheer size of the animal, having no idea at all what kind of life it leads, or that its intelligence is not so far removed from his own. The blue whale is the largest creature that has ever lived on Earth, larger than any dinosaur. It is also the largest of the baleen whales, the group that has fibrous plates instead of teeth. The grey whale, not much smaller, is a close relation, as is the finback, the sei, and the minke whale. The humpback is a cousin. Its monstrous ugliness hides a certain charm. The sperm is the largest of the toothed whales. It's everybody's idea of what a whale should look like, complete with a smile at the corner of its mouth. Whales breathe air, have warm blood, and carry and nurse their young. They evolved from small four-legged land animals which returned to the sea. Their adaptation to oceanic life was almost perfect. They spread to every corner of the globe and have very few natural enemies. The agency usually responsible for their death is, of course, man. Ironically, almost all the information about the great whales comes from the whaling industry itself. The news that most species of great whales have been so decimated as to be practically extinct came from the metal marker tags planted by scientists and collected by the whalers. However, there are many smaller varieties of whales in the ocean which are considerably luckier. They are not wanted by man and serve no useful purpose in his economic machine. They are all toothed whales. The spectacular killer whale sometimes hunts in packs, but is as inquisitive and playful as any other whale. The pilot whale, with its jet black skin, lounges about in tropical waters, while the white whale, or beluga, appears only in the Arctic. The smallest and most numerous of the whale family are the dolphins, or porpoises as they are frequently called. Their cheerful and playful disposition accounts for much of their popularity. Even so, they are not entirely safe. Every year, an estimated 200,000 are killed inadvertently by the tuna fish industry. Dolphins, too, like eating tuna. They get tangled up in the fishing nets and drown. However, it is the small whales that we know most about, simply because they are small. They fit very nicely into marine circuses and dolphinaria. These animals can be easily kept in holding tanks and studied closely. These studies are beginning to reveal some amazing features. It seems that in every way the dolphin is a most unusual animal. For example, this dolphin is being taken to the optician. The eye specialist in this case is Professor William Dawson, who's concerned with the ophthalmology of various animals and has only recently turned to dolphins.
The characteristics of the eye are determined primarily by the cornea and the lens and the axial length of the eye. In the animal lying here in the open, it appears that he is very myopic. That is, he probably doesn't see objects which are more than 4 feet from him. However, it's clear that he can do so under proper training conditions and demonstrates this very well. So there must be some accommodative mechanism which we don't understand. There are some fish and birds where this has been demonstrated to be an accommodative mechanism. However, it's very poorly understood. I think this is probably the only mammalian form where this may be possible. He has some extremely elaborate extraocular muscles which might tend to make one believe this possibility.
In other words, he may change the shape of his whole eye rather than just the lens. This would be unique among mammals. Dolphins cannot stay out of water for long unless they are constantly being hosed down, simply because their skin dries up. As they have no sweat glands to control their temperature in air, they would eventually die from heat exhaustion. Once back in their element, they are as graceful as any other animal and can express themselves equally well in their movements. Friendly as they are, dolphins do not take kindly to undignified treatment and have their own way of showing their disgust. They move superbly underwater, and their tail flukes give them a phenomenal amount of acceleration and very accurate control of their whole bodies. The remarkable development of their eyesight and their flukes shows clearly in the delicacy and accuracy of their demonstration leaps. There is a paradox here, as given their shape, weight, and muscle power, the science of hydrodynamics says they should not be able to swim as fast as they do.
Right on the snout. That will give us the flow across the beak of the animal. A little bit more.
A curious experiment was carried out recently in Holland by a British scientist, Dr. Peter Purvis, and his Dutch colleague, Dr. Dudok van Heel. A full-sized wooden model of a dolphin was painted with zebra stripes.
Yes, if you put one about 6 inches in front of the flukes, we'll get the flow across the top of the flukes.
Before the paint had a chance to dry, the whole contraption was lowered into a tank of water. The tank was to act as a kind of wind tunnel as water was pumped at speed past the model.
Now you can see the streamlines going in parallel rows along the snout, and then they fan out over the melon. But as soon as they get past the head, they begin to sweep obliquely upwards and not parallel with the long axis of the body, as has been alleged before. And you can see behind the dorsal fin there's no evidence at all of separation of the boundary layer, because the streamlines continue in this way, sweeping upwards towards this thin, faired edge. Because the boundary layer clings to the body and separates over this sharp edge, you do not get a big turbulent eddy at a point about 2/3 of the way along the body, which would produce an enormous drag force.
It is this unexpected lack of turbulence against any part of the body of the dolphin that gives it the extra turn of speed. Another surprise comes from its ability to dive to depths up to 2,400 feet below the surface. That distance is amazing enough in itself. But as it breathes air like any other mammal, why does it not get the bends when it returns to the surface? This animal has been trained to hold its breath and blow it out into a funnel for analysis. Then, in the open ocean, it dives. When it reaches the bottom, the dolphin pushes a button which triggers a camera. The picture it takes of itself shows that its rib cage collapses to accommodate the increased pressure. Such collapse prohibits the exchange of gases in his circulation and possibly protects the animal from decompression sickness and nitrogen narcosis. Furthermore, when its breath was analyzed at the surface, it was found that it had only used just enough oxygen to keep its heart going. The mystery of how its brain and the rest of its body manages to operate without oxygen remains unsolved. But what is really even more remarkable is that it is intelligent enough to perform this complex task at all. And this applies to all smaller whales. It is hard to think of a killer whale as cuddly, but that is just the impression he gives. He is also exceedingly curious, in a manner more usually associated with monkeys and humans. This means he is very quick to learn. This killer is having its very first lesson in leaping. Within a few days, it becomes the star of the show. An interesting outcome of the training program for these shows was that dolphins have a clear idea of abstract concepts. The dolphin on the left wished to remain on the left when they turned round to come the other way. They had the greatest difficulty getting him to stay on the inside lane for both runs. One can even go further than that and say that dolphins are capable of creative thinking. This dolphin only gets a reward when it invents a new movement. It gets no help from the trainer as to what it should do. It took some time to get the message, but during the final session of this experiment, the dolphin was creating brand new original maneuvers out of its own head every time. So it's the animal's brain which is its most important asset. In one view, there are two mountain peaks in the world of animal evolution. On one sits man, and on the other, the whales and dolphins. This is the brain of a sperm whale, the largest brain on Earth. But because of the animal's huge body size, it is in fact not quite as well developed as the human brain. However, the dolphin, with about the same body size as a human, also has the same size brain. In addition, the convolutions of a dolphin's brain are just as complex as the human's. There is, however, one big difference. A huge part of the dolphin's brain is concerned with the reception and transmission of sound. Basically, small whales make three types of sound. A kind of shriek or shouted exclamation, which they seem to reserve for talking to humans. A gentle whistling, which they use for talking to each other. And a rapid machine gun fire of clicks, which they use for locating objects by sound. In many ways, the dolphin is perfectly happy without the use of its eyes. By bouncing these clicking sounds off objects, it can echolocate underwater like a bat. But it has a special part of the brain reserved for listening to these sounds, which has nothing to do with the shrieks and whistles. It is therefore much more sophisticated than a bat. Blindfolded, it finds party tricks like this dead easy. This ability is far more highly developed than anyone at first expected. They can in fact discriminate between two objects that it would take a micrometer to tell apart. The instruments fixed to the animal's head are microphones, and these told the scientist that the echolocation beam was being focused through the animal's forehead. Dolphins use echolocation all the time, blindfolded or not. Here, hydrophones have been placed all round the tank in order to measure the directional intensity of the echolocation beam. Such is the character of water that one might expect the sound waves to spread in all directions round the tank. As the animal echolocates onto its trainer's hand, the central hydrophones record a strong signal. Whereas the hydrophones only just outside the beam record only a faint signal. If human engineers were asked to reproduce such a narrow beam of sound in water, they would need 2 generators the size of a small room. The dolphin does it in his head. Every trainer, scientist, or for that matter, anybody who comes up against dolphins, immediately establishes a rapport with them, a communicating link. In fact, the communication part of their brain is extremely interesting. Here at Marineland in Florida, a team of scientists listening to and analyzing dolphin whistles is headed by Dr. David Caldwell.
The purpose of all this is that we believe that each individual dolphin has its own signature whistle, which we can identify the animal by. Down here we have examples of 3 of these sonograms from 3 different animals. As you can see, the first 2 are very similar, but actually there are a good many differences in the composition of the contour, whereas this 3rd animal is quite different. Socially, we feel that this has some bearing on the animals being able to identify each other.
To test this idea, an experiment is set up by Nick Hall.
This is the J9 transducer, the underwater speaker that we use to project the sounds to the animal. The object of these tests is to find out if bottlenose dolphins are able to recognize other dolphins simply by listening to them.
This animal is 232. He was given the number when he was captured, and his strong personality made itself apparent so quickly that the name stuck before anyone could call him Fred or Bill. Nick Hall will play him some whistles which he will recognize, and some he won't. If he does recognize one, he is to press the paddle. If he doesn't, he ignores it.
Now, the most important aspect of this whole study is to realize that the sounds that we're using are from the same animals, but recorded under a variety of stimulus conditions. Each animal was recorded underwater, it was recorded in air. Some of the sounds were recorded when the animals were playing, others when they were out of the water receiving medication. So the only common element is the individual animal that was making the emission.
This is much the same as humans being able to recognize a voice whether shouted, whispered, or distorted by a telephone. So there could be more to the whistles than just voice prints or signatures. Another member of the team, Melba Caldwell, has just started work on this.
All right, those are the whistles of an isolated juvenile male that had just been removed from the herd and is doing what we call calling. Now, at that speed, which is recorded speed, most of the whistles sound the same. However, we reduce the speed, you will observe that they do have minor differences. It is these differences in the intensity, in the number emitted, the slight frequency changes that we believe must convey emotional information to the other members of the herd.
Here in Holland, a flashing light is placed in front of a dolphin. A barrier separates it from a neighboring tank, in which a second dolphin has 2 buttons to press. The second dolphin cannot see the light, but he can hear his neighbor's clicks and whistles. A steady light means the right-hand button is to be pressed. A flashing light means the left-hand button. This establishes beyond doubt that dolphins are able to pass simple instructions to one another. All their sounds are monitored, and the scientists are trying to find out if there are abstract dolphin words for left and right, or whether it's simply a binary code like yes and no, which the dolphins have invented for this experiment. So far, the deciphering process is proving extremely difficult. If dolphins do talk, if they have a language, it has not yet been found. Fascinating though the sounds of dolphins and other small whales are, this is still a very young science. Far less is known about the great whales, and yet everything we say about dolphins, we should be able to say about whales. For example, like the dolphins, they have very active voices. The blue whale emits a sound as low and as loud as a World War II cruiser. The sound of a finback whale is so low that man can only just hear it when it is speeded up at least 6 times. The man who made these recordings is Dr. William Cummings, working for the U.S. Navy in San Diego. What do these sounds mean?
I wish we did know the significance of the large whale sounds. We record them over and over again from several different species. However, unlike the case of the small whales, where we can work with animals in captivity and subject them to experimentation, it's very difficult to work with the large whales. The question comes up, how does one get a 70-foot, possibly 80-ton monster into a tank and experiment with it? However, we believe that we now have some methods of experimenting with the large whales in the field. And an example of this is attempts to play back sound to the animals. Now, we've indicated this through our experiments in playing back the killer whale sounds to gray whales.
The sounds that the greys themselves make were monitored before and after the killer sounds were played. Not surprisingly, the gray whales stopped making any sounds of their own and vanished into the distance. This was pretty elementary, but one had to begin at the beginning.
First of all, we know less about the great whales than we do any other marine mammal in general. And this is primarily because they are so much more difficult to observe, so much more difficult to work with. The great whales are becoming, as you know, very rare. The blue whale population is at an all-time low, as is the population of all species of whales. There are 10 mysticeid or baleen whales and 1 sperm whale. These are the great whales. And I believe that if we don't take this opportunity to get this information, we may not have another chance with some of these species.
One species, the humpback whale, is rapidly becoming famous for the beautiful songs it sings. In spite of its humped back and the knobs on its face, it is really a very graceful creature. It has a happy personality and often leaps out of the water in sheer joy. The man who made these recordings is Dr. Roger Payne. As the animal is close to extinction, this was a remarkable achievement.
It's a fantastic animal, it really is. It's one of the most beautiful sounds in the world as far as I'm concerned. I never grow tired of it. I've listened to it for many, many years. Those are exactly the way those sounds would be if you were listening to them. They're not speeded up or slowed down or fiddled with in any way at all. They're exactly the way they'd occur naturally. The echo that you hear is because the whale's in very deep water, probably 1,500 feet about. And the water echo's coming off the bottom and then from the top. But there's something that's even better, which you miss and you can't hear from just this sort of a recording. The sounds go far lower, way, way down, so deep that you only feel them, you hardly hear them. There's another difference, which is that the volume you're hearing is very faint. If you heard it at full volume, it would just blow you right out of the room. These sounds have a pattern to them, and this pattern is repeated. These are actually tracings of spectrograms, and they show you some of the sounds made by whales. For instance, start at the beginning here. This whale starts by going sort of... and then the same thing again, another phrase, and on, changing slowly, sort of evolving its sounds as it goes, until after about 5 to 10 minutes of this sort of production, it comes to the head again, the start, and repeats the whole thing all over again. So that you see down here the whale doing exactly the same set of phrases. Now the important thing is, however, that in spite of this sort of constancy to the sound, there's also a good deal of variability from song to song. For instance, here you have a sort of whooping sound, whoop, that comes up from the bottom, followed by some very high shrieks. Again, the same thing in the second song by the same whale. When you slow these way down, you get rather fantastic variability to them.
The similarity of this to the slowing down of dolphin whistles is clear. They obviously serve some function of communication.
That means you really have to look at the song from two angles. What do the high frequencies mean? What do the low frequencies mean? I think there's sections addressed to two different audiences. One close, the high frequencies, which don't travel very far, and one a more distant audience, the lower frequencies, which go for tremendous distances. These sounds probably travel for distances of 700 miles. It may announce the presence of one whale to the other, a message that translates a whale is here.
So there's little doubt that whales and dolphins communicate socially, though not in the same way as man. However, they're much better at it than other animals, like dogs or even chimpanzees. So social studies amongst groups, like human sociology, should be possible. At SeaWorld in San Diego, California, trainers work with groups of dolphins in captivity. One of the trainers is Larry Clifford.
All the animals are divided into teams, and each team has its leader. And this is Cindy, and she's in charge of this group here. She's boss. And the way they prove this is by fighting, and whoever's the strongest, they roll. And once they establish this, then they fight until they are the leader. We have heard reports that these animals, they flock together when sharks are around, and they kill the sharks, and they stick together and they fight together. We've also heard reports that these animals have tried to save another dolphin that is drowning and bring it up to the surface, one dolphin on each side, and push it up. When a baby is being born, when a calf is being born, the mother always has another female with her, and in case any trouble, the other female helps her out. So we do have very high social order, and they're very intelligent.
But captivity is not a natural environment. In Hawaii, a team from the Oceanic Institute has been studying a group of dolphins in the wild. This is a type known as spinners, for obvious reasons. The man responsible for the study is Dr. Kenneth Norris.
I can see no evidence in the schools as a whole of any leader. And indeed, I have some evidence to the contrary, that none really exists. This is that when we see a school reverse, for example, the animals simply turn around, even though it may be over 2 miles of sea, and go the other direction. It isn't as if they were following a leader and going around behind an individual. In the subgroups, there is a dominance hierarchy often, where there will be a dominant animal, which may be an old female as well as an old male. Some of the old gals in the porpoise world are pretty tough customers. The nearest thing to a playtime comes a little after they wake up, when the animals begin to go to sea. These are chases where porpoises are nipping one another, they're rolling over in the water, there's a lot of sexual activity going on, a lot of vocalization. Porpoises, little baby ones, are practicing their spinning and this sort of thing. They sometimes will go on obliviously jumping into the air and spinning until you almost run over them in the boat. And then they look up and say, "Oh, what's that thing?" and get out of there and leave.
They also take part in what seems a highly dangerous occupation known as bow riding.
And there have been a number of hydrodynamic studies which show that there is a pressure field at the bow of a ship. The animal comes along and, so to speak, puts his tail into this pressure field, and he's getting a free ride. And it must be a lot of fun. And the real question is, how did they learn to do this when they do it all around the world, and when ships have only been on the ocean for, 3,000 years maybe? And we used to puzzle about this until we finally found out that they ride the bows of big whales also. We've seen porpoises riding a humpback, and it looked to me as if the humpback didn't like it very well, but there wasn't anything he could do. These animals use sexual behavior as the sort of matrix of most of their social behavior. There's a tremendous lot of mating going on in a school which has no function as far as reproduction is concerned. And we'll see all kinds of groupings, all female groups, and we'll see sexual behavior between them. We'll see male-male groups and sexual behavior between them, and then heterosexual groups as well. So you get all of these combinations, which is one of the reasons we say that much of the sexual behavior has a social context rather than a reproductive context. We think that the hydrodynamic requirements of the animals have smoothed off their outside surfaces to the point where they don't have a lot of expression on the surface of their heads or anything. But it's very likely that they read one another's moods and so forth by echolocating into the other animal and looking at the air spaces, which do reflect the sound back very well, so that they may be expressing rage and fear and so forth internally, if you will, and reading it internally in each other.
The suggestion that dolphins indulge in an elementary form of mind reading supports the impression that they seem to be living in a utopian world in which there are no leaders, no inhibitions, no competition, and where life is free and lived for pure enjoyment. Maybe the same applies to the great whales. A large number of Californian gray whales assemble annually in one lagoon off Mexico. These barnacled leviathans gather together in groups and seem almost to frolic in the sun. Like the dolphins, sex play is unrestrained. This is a mating group of 3. But if scientists are going to investigate these animals more closely, One of them will have to be caught. This is Gigi, the only great whale in captivity. She lives in a series of interconnecting tanks and is looked after by a bevy of scientists and keepers. She's only 6 months old. In the tank with her are 2 fully grown dolphins for her to play with. At the moment, most of the water has been drained from this tank so that she can be fed. Dr. David Kenny is responsible for her.
She was a baby, a nursing baby, when we first caught her. And we had to raise her for about 5 to 6 months only on formula. And we devised this formula on the basis of walrus formulas that we've had before. And then we changed it according to the differences or changes in the blood chemistries that we've come upon during this time. And today, she weighs a little over 8,000 pounds and is almost 25 feet in length. So it gives you an idea of the rate of growth, which is fantastic. She's also eating over 1,000 pounds a day.
That's almost half a ton of food a day. The local squid fishermen are doing a roaring trade. She was very quick to learn to come over to her keeper and open her mouth for food. As soon as she settled down, research could begin. As she represents a totally unexplored field of science, any information, however basic, is of biological interest. Here she's having the size of her lungs measured by blowing into a balloon. Other experiments showed that she has a very high cholesterol level in her blood, high enough to give any other mammal a heart attack. Her skin, too, showed remarkable properties.
On the transport of her from Scammons Lagoon in Baja California to San Diego SeaWorld, we left a large rope underneath her, which we didn't know about, and it rubbed a large wound on her belly. It was about 2.5 feet long and about 18 inches wide, which now is completely healed. These animals seem to heal, number one, very rapidly, but number two, they heal without a scar. Now, there is still a slight scar there, but you can see evidence now that the normal pigmentation is coming through it, where within another 6 months, there will be no evidence whatsoever that she ever had a wound there. The importance of this, I think, is for this to stimulate some researchers into looking into the properties of healing and what causes this, and perhaps this can be put over towards the human being or any other animals.
The young animal has a huge amount of power in her body, and yet she is very gentle and almost cow-like. But unfortunately, she's growing very fast.
Well, eventually she'll be turned loose when she's really too big for our environment here. But right now she isn't, and of course you can see the larger tank out here that she can be turned into, and so she has quite a long while here before she would have to be turned loose.
Apart from the occasional scientist, man no longer pursues the great gray whale along the west coast of America where it lives. Its idyllic existence seems likely to continue. For other members of this intelligent and sociable species, the story is different. The modern whaling fleet is an armada of ships carrying out what amounts to a military operation. They use helicopters, radar, sonar, supply ships, factory ships, hospital ships, and killer birds. Their main weapon is an explosive harpoon fired from a cannon. which explodes like a hand grenade after it has entered the whale's body. A blue whale. The man who has made a special study of the species and what happened to it is Professor George Small.
Behind me is the model of a 92-foot blue whale. This species is the largest animal that has ever lived on the face of the earth. Its weight can surpass 200 tons, 4 times that of the largest dinosaur. And yet this magnificent mammal within the last 40 years has been pushed from a population of 150,000 to the verge, that horrible verge of biological extinction. In 1925, a Norwegian engineer invented a slipway on a factory ship, which made it possible for man to draw the carcass up on a factory ship to there dismember it and to boil the oil, which meant that the whalers could operate on the high seas anywhere where they could locate the animal. And within 6 years after that, over 40 factory ships were operating with literally hundreds of killer boats armed with 90-millimeter cannon. In that 1 year alone, they killed almost 30,000 blue whales. And ever since that time, the annual kill, has far surpassed the production of the species itself.
Why do we need to kill whales? The entire whaling industry is worth £100 million a year. In fact, this is very small, much smaller, for example, than the peanut industry. But where do whale products go? Russia and Japan are the two big whaling nations, and some of it goes to those two countries for food. In fact, whale meat could supply a vast amount of protein food for undernourished nations, but it's not very popular. Although the Russian housewife still buys a lot, in Japan the taste for it is dying out. Every part of the animal is used. Practically nothing gets thrown away. From the baleen, we make brooms and brushes. Whalebone corsets have gone out of fashion. But the blubber and bones and oils extracted from the whales are used for an amazing range of products. From lipsticks, shampoos and other kinds of cosmetics to shoe polish, floor polish, candles, toys, chess sets, handbags, shoe horns, margarine, soap, bicycle saddles, transmission oil, film emulsion, and even fertilizer.
The old argument that we need individual whale products is nonsense. There is not a single substance taken from whales for which there are not far more abundant synthetic or naturally occurring alternatives.
But there is one huge area where whale products are used extensively.
The pet food companies use the meat for dog and cat foods, principally. It's an interesting point. Just that very group of people who would be most outraged to discover that the food which they're feeding to their pets, their dogs and cats, that very group of people probably doesn't realize that it's subsidizing the overexploitation of whales.
By 1970, British cats and dogs alone accounted for 7% of the world's annual whale catch. There are two sides to the industry. It's the consumer demand that makes it economically possible for the whalers to catch so many whales. However, there is an organization which is designed to control whaling. After the Second World War, an international whaling commission was set up by the industry itself, drawing delegates from every nation involved in whaling. It came about largely because the blue whale, the backbone of the industry, was becoming extremely scarce. After the war, it became so hard to find that the member nations were banned from catching it. Though, if one was to find one and pop it in the bag, who's to know? Next, the industry turned to the most prolific whale, the finback, which sustained the industry for many years until it, too, ran into a rapid decline. It's not protected even to this day. Then came the much smaller sei whale. Not very numerous, it reached its peak and was decimated in a fairly short space of time. Now, today, it's the turn of the sperm whale. It's still found in large numbers all over the world, but already the size of the animals caught is beginning to decrease. Something is obviously wrong with the International Whaling Commission.
The problem is it hasn't got any teeth. It can't make anything stick. It can't enforce anything and have it last. For an example, let me read you something from the proceedings of the 17th meeting of the Commission. It was decided, quote, "It is forbidden to use a whale catcher attached to a factory ship for killing or attempting to kill sperm whales in the waters between 40 degrees south latitude and 40 degrees north latitude." Then it goes on to say, "This amendment of the schedule was objected to within the prescribed period by Norway, Japan, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This paragraph was therefore not binding on these countries. But it also happens that Norway, Japan, and Russia are the only three countries on Earth hunting sperm whales in those latitudes, and therefore it is a completely meaningless decision. It does not mean a thing. Might as well never have been passed."
The International Whaling Commission stumbles along quite as ineffective as it has ever been. And until this situation changes, no valuable species of whale on the high seas is safe. And in my estimation, all commercial whaling should cease until man can devise an organization with the power to enforce its own regulations. And until that time happens, no whale is safe from extermination.
I'd like to see the markets for whales closed. In other words, for whale products closed. I'd like to see this begin just as it has begun in the United States, in other countries as well. The United States recently passed something called the Endangered Species Act. This puts all large whales onto a list which may not be imported into this country. Now, what that means is that if other countries wish to sell whales, they cannot sell them to the United States. Suppose other countries, for example, England and Germany and so on in Europe, were to stop the importation of whale products. This means that there is nothing that the industry can do about that. In other words, there is no way around that fact.
There's not much we could do for the giant panda or the buffalo, but the whales could be saved. We could close the markets for whale products with a simple piece of legislation. A bill preventing the import of whale products into Britain would cut the market by a further 10%. If the European countries followed the American lead, almost half the world market would have vanished. With such a hole in their economy, the whaling industry would find it impossible to continue. Not many of us will ever have seen a living whale, but because their level of intelligence is second only to our own, and because we are exterminating them, not casually or inadvertently, but knowingly and purposefully, the whales would seem to have a special claim on our help. The dolphin has been called a cousin to man, and we have developed a special affection for this animal. Their larger brothers, the great whales, we are killing off at the rate of 1 every 12 minutes. 1 whale every 12 minutes.
Since that programme was first shown, the British Pet Food Manufacturers Association has announced that the major manufacturers in the industry who use whale meat in their products are phasing out current stocks and are placing no further purchase contracts.